They say the greatest cruelty of slavery wasn't the whip, the chains, or the back-breaking labor. It was the silence that followed the sound of footsteps walking away, footsteps carrying a mother in one direction, a father in another, and their children in three more. No screams. No negotiation. No mercy. Just the sound of a family being ripped apart forever. But sometimes a family refuses to stay broken. This is the story of one enslaved family, a mother, a father, and three children, sold to different masters across the South, but who refused to die with their memories. A family who crossed rivers, backroads, forests, slave codes, patrols, and death itself to find each other again. Most people never lived long enough to try. And those who tried, never lived long enough to succeed. But this family? This family turned the impossible into destiny. This is their story. This is the family they broke. Before we begin this journey, take a moment and join our growing community here on Hidden Tales. Every subscription helps us uncover more forgotten stories, stories of courage, survival, rebellion, and hope. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell and help keep these stories alive. Now, let's begin. The year was 1851, and the Hammond Plantation in northern Georgia was as close to a kingdom as any man like Josiah Hammond could hope to rule. 5,000 acres of cotton, tobacco, and corn stretched beyond the eye, with more than 100 enslaved men and women laboring from the first light of dawn to the last gasp of dusk. The cabins were quiet that morning, save for the clatter of wooden bowls and the scuffling of bare feet crossing the dirt. But inside cabin 6, the smallest, closest to the tree-line, something sacred lived. Something that rarely survived on plantations. A family. Mary, Samuel, and their three children, Henry aged 12, Ruth aged 9, and little Amos barely 4. Nothing on the plantation was theirs, but somehow their love belonged to no one but themselves. Mary was a soft-spoken woman with eyes that had once been bright enough to light a cabin. Samuel was tall, silent, and broad-shouldered, a man who worked like a river stone, withstanding everything that beat against him. Their children were clever, curious, and unusually bonded. Most enslaved families did not last long on plantations like Hammond's. A single bad harvest, a debt owed, a master's whim, an overseer's cruelty, any of these could scatter a family like leaves in a storm. Yet somehow, against the odds, they remained whole. Until the morning the master rode back. Josiah Hammond had left 3 days before for Savannah to handle business, but everyone knew what that meant. The slave block. The auction yard. The bitter-smelling pen where men, women, and children were kept, examined, priced, and sold. When Hammond returned from Savannah, someone on the plantation always disappeared. That morning Mary felt it before she saw it. A trembling at the base of her spine. A ringing in her ears. She woke up before the rooster crowed, sitting upright on their straw pallet, breath caught in her chest. Samuel turned in the dimness. "What is it?" he whispered. Mary shook her head. "Something wrong. Something coming." Samuel wrapped a hand around hers, rough but steady. "We face it together." But Mary only stared at the door as if someone might already be standing outside it. The children slept soundly, twisted in blankets. Henry's foot poked out. Ruth's braids were tucked beneath a rag. Amos clutched a small carved wooden bird Samuel had made for him. Mary looked down at them with a kind of trembling hope, the kind that knows it has no right to exist but clings anyway. Minutes later the horn sounded. The horn that only blew when the master wanted all enslaved people gathered. Mary froze. Samuel's jaw clenched. The children startled awake. "No," Mary whispered. "Not today. Lord, not today." But today was exactly the day. The enslaved people gathered in front of the big house. The white paint on the walls shone sharply in the rising sun, almost too bright to look at. Hammond stood on the porch, tugging his gloves tight. His boots were polished. His hair oiled. His face held a look that every enslaved person recognized. A decision had been made. Behind him stood a stranger, a thin white man with a ledger under his arm and a quill tucked behind his ear. Someone who dealt in human beings for a living. A traitor. Mary felt her knees weaken. Samuel's hand tightened around hers until her fingers hurt. Hammond cleared his throat. "Some of y'all know," he began, "that the last 3 harvests haven't given what this land used to yield. Times is changing. Cotton prices rising and falling. Hard to keep up." A few enslaved people nodded. Most kept their eyes down. "So," Hammond continued, "I made arrangements to lighten the burden." Mary's breath left her body. Lighten the burden meant one thing. Selling souls. Hammond scanned the crowd, and even before he spoke, Mary felt the ground tilt beneath her. I've chosen 5 of you to be relocated. His voice was almost cheerful. Henry, Ruth, Amos, Mary, Samuel. Mary cried out. A sound broke from her throat that echoed across the yard like a shot. Henry grabbed her arm. Ruth burst into tears. Little Amos tried to climb into Samuel's arms. Samuel kept his face still by force alone. Hammond frowned. Now, y'all settle yourselves. This ain't goodbye for all of you. Only for some. Mary felt everything inside her collapse. Hammond pointed at the traitor. Henry goes to Mr. Cunningham's place in Alabama. Good strong boy, they'll pay well. Mary grabbed Henry by the shoulders, holding him so tightly the boy gasped. No. He stays with me. Hammond ignored her. Ruth goes to Mrs. Longshore in South Carolina. They need house girls. Ruth whimpered and clung to her mother's dress. And Amos, Hammond continued casually, he's heading to Louisiana. Little ones fetch high price out there. Samuel stepped forward, his voice low, trembling. Master, please. Not the boy. He too little. Hammond raised his riding crop sharply. One more word, Samuel, and I sell you separately from your wife. You hear me? Mary's screams turned into choking sobs. The children were pried away one by overseer's hands. Henry fought with everything he had. Ruth screamed. Amos kicked and cried until his voice broke. The sound of Mary begging, pleading, calling their names as they were dragged away, was something no one on that plantation ever forgot. That day Hammond didn't just sell a family. He tore a universe apart. Weeks passed. Then months. Then a year. Mary and Samuel were sold to different plantations themselves. The breaking was complete. That was how slavery worked. Break the family, break the lineage, break the resistance. But sometimes something survives the breaking. A memory. A promise. A fire. Mary kept the memory of her children alive in her chest like a coal that refused to burn out. Samuel carried their names like armor, whispering them to himself during field work, as if speaking them could keep them alive. Miles apart, on different plantations, both of them made the same quiet, impossible vow. I will find my children again. No matter how long it takes. No matter where they've gone. No matter who stands in the way. And so begins a journey that would span states, rivers, forests, slave patrols, and years. The story of a family who refused to stay broken. The story of how they found each other again, not by miracles but by will. And the price they paid for that reunion. Samuel learned something about pain in the months after the breaking. Not the pain of a whip or hunger or exhaustion, but a deeper kind that settled into the bones and refused to leave. The kind that woke him in the middle of the night, unsure whether he had been dreaming or remembering. The kind that made the world feel muffled like cotton stuffed in his ears. He worked on the Claiborne plantation now, farther north, closer to the Carolina border. The fields were smaller than Hammond's, the overseers stricter, the daily rations thinner. The first morning he arrived, the overseer pointed to a row of cotton bushes and said only, "Keep up or fall behind and die. Choice yours." But no pain they could give him matched the pain he already carried. At night, when the cabins fell quiet, Samuel lay awake trying to reconstruct the sound of each of his children's voices. Henry's laughter had once been a crackling thing, bright and sudden. Ruth had sung to herself as she braided her hair. Amos had only just learned to string full sentences together. Samuel tried to hold on to those words like they were gold. But memories fade when they're forced into silence, and that terrified him more than death. Still, he refused to let those faces drift into fog. He repeated their names every night like a prayer, slow and careful, as if shaping them might somehow keep them alive. Henry, Ruth, Amos. He whispered them again and again until the rhythm steadied his breathing. 2 plantations away, Mary was doing the same thing, though Samuel did not know it yet. Mary had been sold to a place called Briarstone, a grim patch of land with cabins that leaned like dying trees and a mistress who never spoke to the enslaved except to demand something. The work was endless. Sunrise to sundown, then hours of mending clothes by candlelight. Her palms cracked, her feet bled, but she too refused to let the memories slip. Sometimes she believed the memories were the only part of her soul they hadn't found a way to claim. She had always been gentle. But sorrow has a way of sharpening even the softest hearts. She became quieter, harder, more watchful. Every new group of enslaved people brought in from auctions or trade routes was a chance. A slim one, but a chance, that someone had heard of Henry or Ruth or Amos. So Mary asked quietly, secretly, in the corners of fields or while passing water buckets. Did anyone hear of a boy named Henry sold to Alabama? A girl named Ruth sold to South Carolina? A baby boy going to Louisiana? Most shook their heads sadly. A few made promises to listen. One older woman touched Mary's cheek and said softly, "Child, them babies of yours ain't lost to God. Keep calling their names." But calling was not enough. Not for Mary. Not for Samuel. Not for their children. The same fire that once warmed their little cabin was still alive, scattered but alive, in each of them. And that fire would guide them step by step toward one another. Henry was the first of the children to decide he would not stay where he'd been placed. The Alabama plantation where he had been taken, Ash Grove, was a brutal place, run by two brothers who believed the best worker was a terrified one. 12-year-old boys were expected to labor like grown men. Henry's back carried rope scars from the day he refused to leave with the traders. His arms still ached from being tied down in a wagon for 3 days straight. But Henry's spirit, that part had never been bound. He learned the plantation quickly, where the overseers rode, where the hounds slept, where the fence was weakest, where the swamp behind the sugar mill dipped low enough to hide a person lying flat. He studied the guards until he knew their tempers and their footsteps. And every night after the others fell asleep, he whispered the same words into the dark. "I'm coming, Mama. I'm coming, Papa. I'm coming, Ruth. I'm coming, Amos." At first he whispered with tears. After a few months he whispered with resolve. By the end of the year the tears were gone, replaced by a sharp, burning certainty. He would find them. All of them. Even if he died trying. One night, as cicadas buzzed and the overseers' voices drifted from the porch, Henry sat carving a small wooden figure, a habit he picked up from watching Samuel long ago. His hands were steadier now. Older. Hardened. The figure was rough, lopsided, but he shaped it anyway. It was his mother's face he was carving, though he didn't quite realize it. An older man beside him glanced over. "Boy, you thinkin' on runnin'?" Henry froze. His fingers tightened around the scrap of wood. The man chuckled. "Don't lie. I've been seein' that look in your eyes. Seen it in my own once." Henry swallowed. "If I run, I ain't runnin' for myself." "Don't matter," the man said quietly. "You runnin' for hope. That's the kind they hate most." Henry hesitated, then whispered, "If you was me, what path you take?" The man's face fell serious. He glanced around, making sure no overseer lingered in earshot. Then, with a voice that barely broke a breath, he said, "Head north first. Swamp's thickest that way. Then cut east. Don't ever follow the road, follow the water. Rivers lead to towns. Towns lead to people. People hear things." Henry absorbed every word like scripture. The man continued, voice lowering even more. "Your folks might be lost. Might be gone. But if they out there, even one of them, you keep goin' till your legs give." Henry nodded slowly. The man added, softer still, "And take something from this place when you go. Something that remind you what you runnin' from." Henry did not understand that part until later. Ruth's experience on the South Carolina plantation was different but no less cruel. She lived in the house, not the fields, which meant her suffering came with lace gloves instead of whips, insults instead of lashes, but the hurt cut just as deep. The mistress she served had a cold, sharp way of speaking, as if every word she uttered dragged a splinter of ice behind it. Ruth cleaned china, polished silver, served meals, and slept beside the kitchen hearth on a straw mat. She missed the feel of grass under her feet. She missed her mother's lap. She missed the sound of her brothers roughhousing outside their old cabin. Sometimes she woke up crying before she could stop herself. But Ruth had inherited something her mother carried too, a quiet kind of strength that waited, patient and watchful. The mistress thought Ruth was timid. But Ruth was calculating. She studied every visitor, every conversation, every rumor spoken across a dinner table. She learned names of counties, towns, plantations, traders. She stored everything. One afternoon, while refilling the mistress's tea, Ruth overheard something that made her breath stop. A visitor spoke casually, "That Georgia fellow, Hammond, broke up a whole family last year. Sold the boy to Alabama, the girl to us, the baby down in Louisiana." Ruth's hands froze, the teapot trembling. Her mistress snapped, "You clumsy child. Keep steady." But Ruth didn't hear her. Her heartbeat drowned out the room. That meant Henry was alive. Henry was alive. And he was in Alabama. Hope rushed into her chest so suddenly she could barely breathe. That night, she curled beneath her thin blanket and whispered, "I'm coming, Henry, and Mama, and Papa, and baby Amos. I swear it." Hope creates courage. Courage creates plans. And plans create movement. Ruth began her own path, one that would intersect with Henry's far sooner than either of them knew. Baby Amos was the furthest away, deep in Louisiana, on a sugar plantation that lay like a bruise against the wetlands. He was too young to understand what had happened, too young to remember the faces he had lost, but not too young to feel the ache of something missing. He cried at night. He cried quietly because crying loudly brought punishment. And somewhere in him, somewhere deep, the memory of Mary's voice hummed like a lullaby he couldn't quite recall but clung to anyway. The plantation owners considered him small, fragile, not strong enough to work yet, which meant he spent most of his days among the other children. But children on plantations grow up fast. Faster than they should. And Amos watched everything. The way the men planned escapes in whispers, the way the women hid messages inside quilts, the way people eyed the swamps like they held answers. He learned silence. He learned observation. He learned survival through mimicry. And though he didn't know it yet, everything he absorbed would one day become the tools he used to return to the family he barely remembered. But the one who moved first was Henry. It happened on a night when the air felt thick with storm and fate. Henry lay awake, heart pounding, listening for the guard rotation. When the last lantern on the overseer's porch dimmed and silence wrapped the field, he knew the moment had come. He stood, retrieving the small carved face from beneath his blanket. His mother's face. It wasn't perfect, the nose too wide, the chin too short, but it was Mary to him. He tucked it into the cloth waist tie of his trousers. He looked around once. Twice. No movement. Then he did the thing nobody on Ashgrove Plantation thought a 12-year-old boy could do. He slipped into the night, ran through the rows of cotton, and headed for the swamp, the place the old man had warned him about. The place where freedom and death lived side by side. Henry did not slow. He did not look back. He did not think. He only whispered, "I'm finding you. All of you." Henry entered the swamp like a shadow swallowed whole. The air shifted immediately, colder, thicker, humming with insects. Mud pulled at his feet, roots caught his ankles, and the darkness felt alive, watching him. But Henry kept moving. He had no choice. Every few steps he whispered, "Mama? Papa? Amos?" Not to call them, but to keep himself from drowning in fear. The old man had said the swamp was a graveyard for runaways who moved too slow. Henry planned on moving fast. He followed the water, not the land. The stream that trickled behind the sugar mill widened into a murky channel deeper inside the swamp. He slid along its edge, careful not to step where the mud bubbled. That meant sinking sand. Hours passed. His legs burned. His shirt clung to him, soaked with sweat and swamp water. Branches cracked behind him. Henry froze. He crouched low, breath held, eyes searching the dark. At first he saw nothing, then he heard it, a low, distant growl. Dogs. Not plantation dogs, swamp ferals, wild and hungry. Henry moved again, faster, careful but desperate. The water rose to his knees, then his waist, then his chest. Somewhere ahead, lightning flashed, revealing a silhouette, a fallen tree stretching over the water like a bridge. Henry swam to it and pulled himself up, clinging with scraped fingers. The growling came closer. Leaves rustled. A splash echoed behind him. He didn't look back. He crawled across the fallen tree, slipping twice, catching himself only by sheer stubbornness. When he reached the far side, he slid off the trunk and collapsed onto firmer ground. The growls faded. The swamp settled. His chest heaved. Henry realized he was shaking, not from cold but from the weight of what he'd just done. He was free. Maybe not safe, maybe not far enough, but free. He stood slowly and scanned the darkness. A faint path cut through the trees, barely noticeable but there. Henry stepped onto it. He didn't know where it led. But paths always led somewhere. And somewhere was better than where he had been. The storm broke open above him, rain hammering the leaves and soaking him instantly. He kept walking. Hours later, when dawn finally cracked through the trees, Henry saw smoke in the distance. A chimney. A house. He dropped to his stomach immediately. He watched. A small cabin stood alone at the edge of a clearing. No overseers, no guards, no fields. A single woman stepped out, gathering wood, humming softly. She wasn't white. She was black. And free. Henry stared, unable to breathe. He had heard rumors. Runaways who made it all the way north and built lives in secret towns, hidden pockets of people who had escaped and refused to leave others behind. He crawled closer, cautious, until a branch snapped beneath him. The woman stiffened. She spun, eyes sharp. She reached for something by the door. Henry stood slowly, hands raised. "Please," he said, voice cracking. "Please don't scream. I ain't here to harm nobody. I just need help." The woman looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "Child," she said quietly, "how long you been running?" Henry swallowed. "All night." "And how far you trying to go?" Henry's jaw trembled. His answer came like a prayer. "Far enough to find my family." The woman nodded once, a slow, steady nod that carried understanding. "Then you come inside," she said. "Storm's too heavy. And you look like you ain't eaten in days." Henry stepped forward, cautious but hopeful. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, stepping aside so he could enter. "You got a long journey, boy. And finding people in this world ain't never simple." Henry walked inside, dripping, exhausted, heart still racing. But for the first time since being torn away from everything he loved, he felt like he was no longer running alone. Henry slept in the tiny cabin for nearly a full day, his body finally surrendering after years of fear, beatings, and endless work. When he woke, the room was dim with late afternoon light, and a pot simmered quietly on the stove. The woman, tall, strong, with silver at the edges of her hair, sat by the table sharpening a knife, not watching him but fully aware he was awake. "You sleep hard," she said without looking up. Henry sat up slowly. "Didn't mean to." "Means you needed it," she replied. "A body can't outrun the world on empty feet." Henry slid off the cot and stood uncertainly. "Ma'am, what should I call you?" She paused. "Folks round these parts call me Miss Lottie," she said finally. Henry nodded. "I'm Henry." "I figured," she said. "You was mumblin' your own name when you slept." Henry's cheeks warmed, but Miss Lottie only chuckled, a sound roughened not by age but by hard years lived. "You hungry?" Henry nodded. Miss Lottie ladled thick stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to him. Henry ate as though afraid someone would snatch the food away. She waited until he slowed down before speaking again. "You said you lookin' for your family?" Henry swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. My mama got sold to a man west of Hawthorne. My sister too. Amos, my little brother, they sent him to a rice field in Carolina. And my daddy was sold before all that." Lottie nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "And you think they still livin'?" Henry's eyes filled. "I have to think so." She studied him then, not the way overseers stared to judge strength, not the way masters looked at a thing they owned, but the way someone looked at another person's soul. "What I'm about to say," she began, "you ain't gonna want to hear." Henry braced himself. "But you got two roads in front of you, boy. One where you keep running blind, hoping you stumble onto the right people. And one where you learn how this world really works and move smart." Henry lowered his bowl. "I don't understand." "You will," she said. She stood, walked to a corner trunk and pulled out a rolled map. It wasn't like the plantation maps Henry knew. This one had notes written in dark strokes, symbols marking cabins, ferries, trails, and places without names. Miss Lottie placed it on the table. Henry stepped closer. "This," she said, tapping a line with her finger, "is the route the traders use. Same route they took to sell families out of Hawthorne." Henry's breath caught. You know their paths?" Lottie nodded. "I used to run messages for the ones who help folks escape. Learned every road they move us down. Every market. Every place men like Hawthorne sell souls." Henry stared at the map, tracing the roads with trembling fingers. "Can you help me find them?" Lottie didn't answer right away. She pulled a second map from the trunk, worn, cracked, folded 100 times too many. "This one," she said quietly, "don't show roads. Shows people. People who escaped. People who hide others. People who know where the sold ones were taken." Henry blinked. "Like, a network?" "That's one word for it," she said. "A promise is another." She pointed to a mark in the far corner of the map, a small circle drawn in red. "That's where your mama and sister most likely been sent," she said. "A small farm run by a man named Dillard. Hard man but not cruel like Hawthorne." Henry's heart pounded. "You sure?" "As sure as a person can be in a world where folks buy and sell each other." Henry's voice cracked. "And Amos?" Lottie exhaled slowly. "Rice fields in Carolina. That's a death sentence if he stayed there long." Henry's chest caved. He gripped the table. "But," she continued firmly, "I also know a man who pulls sick children out of them fields and hides them until they get strong." Hope shot through Henry like lightning. "You mean, he could be alive?" Lottie nodded. "Could be." Henry wiped his eyes. "And my daddy?" Lottie hesitated, then pointed to a mark near the top of the map. "That's where I last heard of a man answering your daddy's name. Working blacksmith at a stable house outside Richmond. Ain't confirmed, but the timing matches." Henry stared at the map as though it were breathing. "You mean, he whispered. My family could be found? Lottie's voice softened. If you're willing to fight like hell to find them. Henry stood taller. What do I do first? She rolled up the maps and handed them to him. You need someone who can move you safe, she said. A guide. Man named Ezra lives 2 days from here. Hard to find, harder to trust, but if he takes you, you'll cross 3 states without touching a road. Henry nodded. I'll go. Not tonight, she warned. Storm's too heavy. Rest one more night. Leave at dawn. Henry opened his mouth to argue, but she raised her hand. You ain't gonna save nobody if the swamp swallows you. He closed his mouth. Miss Lottie returned to sharpening her knife. Henry sat again, staring at the maps she had given him. For the first time since being torn apart, he had direction. He had purpose. He had hope bigger than fear. But finding his family meant crossing land ruled by men like Hawthorne. Men who would rather burn the world than lose what they believed they owned. Henry lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, holding the silent promise of the maps. He didn't know it yet. But the journey he began at dawn would change not only his life, but the entire world around him, and bring justice to a family broken by a man who believed souls were his to sell. The first light of dawn broke across the marshes like silver glass. Henry left Miss Lottie's cabin quietly, the map rolled under his arm, soaked from the storm the night before. Each step took him deeper into the wilderness, away from the swamp and toward the roads that would eventually lead him north, east, anywhere his family might be. His 12-year-old body was small, but his determination was enormous, larger than any whip, larger than any overseer, larger than the chains that tried to claim him. Days passed. Henry relied on the kindness of strangers, those who understood what it meant to be hunted and to hide. Each person who offered him food, a cloak, or a place to rest added a thread to a tapestry of hope. Some spoke in hushed tones of families torn apart. Some whispered names of people who had seen a mother grieving her children or a child clutching a carving of a parent. Slowly, the fragments of information began to form a trail, a network that connected the scattered pieces of his family. Meanwhile, Ruth was making her own escape. After months of subtle observation and careful planning, she slipped away from the longshore plantation one night. Her small figure moved silently along the riverbanks, tracking the patterns of the traders and overseers. Every step she took was guided by the fragments of information she overheard. Whispers of a boy sold to Alabama, a baby sent to Louisiana, a father rumored to work near Richmond. Ruth's resolve was relentless. Where Henry relied on guidance, Ruth relied on cunning and intuition. Mary and Samuel, separated but never broken, began their own quests for reunion. Samuel found work at a blacksmith shop, learning to forge tools that would one day aid in the journey to reunite his family. He spent nights listening for news, piecing together every scrap of gossip from travelers, traders, and other enslaved people who had escaped. Mary, sent to Briarstone, quietly collected information, memorizing routes, notes on the river crossings, and the names of sympathetic strangers who could help. The journey was not simple. They faced slave patrols, treacherous rivers, thick forests, and moments when survival itself was uncertain. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, exhaustion numbed limbs, and yet each member of the family pushed forward, drawn by an invisible tether that pulled them inexorably toward one another. It was Henry who saw the first glimpse of hope, the Dillard farm in South Carolina. Hidden in the shadow of the trees, a faint outline of the cabins revealed the presence of Ruth. Heart pounding, he crept closer. He recognized her immediately, 9 years old now but unmistakably his sister. Tears streamed down both their faces as they embraced, a long-awaited reunion of siblings, small but unbroken. Ruth told him what she had discovered. Amos was alive and being hidden by a man known only as Old Thomas, a protector of escaped children. The father, Samuel, was rumored to be in Richmond working as a blacksmith. And Mary, their mother. She had survived Briarstone and was moving north quietly, always searching for her children. The siblings traveled together, cautious, hiding in swamps, barns, and attics. Every step was perilous, every decision critical. Yet the network of those who helped runaways proved invaluable. They learned quickly that survival depended on silence, vigilance, and trust in the few who had shown them mercy. Weeks later, guided by messages sewn into quilts and verbal codes shared along the way, they finally reached Louisiana. Old Thomas, a large, solemn man with kind eyes, welcomed them. Amos ran into Henry's arms, screaming and crying, finally enveloped in the warmth of his family once more. The baby who had been sold away, the children torn apart, were finally together. But the reunion was not complete. Samuel and Mary remained distant, yet the trail was now clear. Henry and Ruth, guided by old Thomas, made their way north toward Richmond. Every mile brought them closer to their father. Every mile tested their courage, yet neither faltered. When they finally reached Richmond, Samuel was waiting, tools in hand at the blacksmith shop. At first, he did not recognize them. Time had changed them, hardened them, but their eyes held the same spark. And then he did, and the reunion shook them all to their very souls. Finally, the family moved together, northward, tracking their mother, who had narrowly escaped to a small northern settlement. Mary had been aided by sympathetic Quakers, carrying news of scattered families and guiding them along secret routes. The day they finally found her, the reunion was overwhelming. Tears, laughter, whispers of disbelief and gratitude. Each member had survived incredible hardships, yet their love, their will, had preserved them. They had become legends, not for defiance in a single moment, but for defying a system designed to erase them. They had been broken, sold, scattered across states, yet they had reunited, stronger, wiser, and unbowed. In the years that followed, they helped others, becoming part of a network that guided families torn apart, passing on the lessons they had learned. The story of their survival, courage, and ingenuity spread quietly among those who sought freedom. The family that the master had believed he could destroy had instead built a legacy of hope. If you've been moved by this story, join Hidden Tales today. Subscribe, hit the bell, and be part of a community that uncovers stories of courage, survival, and resilience from history's shadows. Every share helps these voices live again. Don't let these forgotten tales fade. Help us bring them to light.